This is George Pasty. I'm sales manager at Dantas, and today's webinar session, we will be reviewing both materials and services master data, and also how they impact your ERP systems. So, for those of you who are new to Dantas, we've been in the market a little over 12 years. We founded the company on cleansing data, so that is to say that we didn't start our company to go sell software. We started our company to go out and provide data services, specifically around materials and now around services. And we've developed robust sets of technology that enable us to do that very quickly and accurately. I've been in the master data space for 15 years.
George, you're breaking out. I don't know if it's our phone. We can call back in if we need to. Can you hear me? Probably.
Hi, yes, we can hear. Even that is the same problem. We'll try again. Thanks.
Well, this is George again. Sorry about that. I appear to have been dropped. I was just getting a little bit into my background, is that I've been in the master data management space for approximately 15 years, with Dantas for over 5. I have a background in engineering, supply chain management, international supply network optimization, and engineering and manufacturing software applications. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. First off, I'll just get into a little introduction around master data from both a cleansing and governance perspective, and then we're going to go through some of the takeaways we've had from engaging with clients, particularly around ERP implementations. To date, we have over 200 client engagements, and we've delivered over 100 million materials as cleansed. So that gives us a little bit of experience in what some of our clients have faced as challenges and different approaches they've taken to these solutions. So first off, what is MDM? In the material space and services space, which is what we're focusing on today, it really becomes that repository of what things are. As opposed to ERP and EAM systems, which are transactional based, and which is really the foundation of the genesis of the MDM market, is that those transactional systems are not great places to master your data. Service masters are a different animal from the material master, in that the material master is often very technical and can have multiple attributes to describe things like motors. Whereas the service master is less about the technical specification of the service. And I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a utility, and they contract a lot of trenching services. And they do that on a wide geographic basis. So they're not concerned about the size of the last trench that was dug by that trenching service, but they want to make sure that that regional office is using that trenching service that's preferred for their region. So the granularity often in services is much less than it is in materials, but there's other kinds of categorization that come into it around whether it's contracted, procured, rented, leased. Is it again, what kind of material is it against? So it's a different animal from materials, and often less technical, but has its own complexities as well. So in terms of the overall material master data management space, it's really broken down really simply into two areas. And that is one, getting it clean, and that's taking your legacy information, be it through acquisitions or decentralization or just lack of adherence to standards, and getting that to a new pristine state where it's standardized, normalized, consistently attributed, and with commodity codes. So that's the get it clean piece. But once you've done that, there has to be mechanisms in place to keep it clean, and that's the whole data governance space. So this is how organizations prevent themselves from getting back into a toxic data environment over time. And one of the reasons Dantas got into the keep it clean space is 3 years into our existence, some of our earlier clients came back to us and said, we're having a lot of difficulty keeping the data you scrubbed for us clean in the ERP system. What can you do to help us? So that's why we got into developing governance software. So in this section, we're going to get into some of the takeaways that we've learned. And one of them is, I'm often asked, why do I need to do this as part of an ERP implementation? And quite simply, it amazes me how many clients will take their existing toxic item masters and just migrate them into their new shiny ERP systems. I akin it to pouring diesel into a Ferrari. You're only going to get out of it what the underlying foundational data is in it. And more people are understanding that now. And a lot of them are actually going back in and cleansing the data that they ported over before because they realize the limitations are hurting them and the value they're trying to realize out of the ERP implementation. And post-ERP implementation, again, got to have those mechanisms in there to make sure that that data stays clean going forward so that you can continue realizing that value over time. Independent third-party numbers crunching from Aberdeen that shows, some market improvement by having cleansed master data as part of your strategy on an ERP implementation in these three different value buckets. So that's quite a significant improvement in inventory turns, as well as accuracy. So, these things are just indicators of the overall potential. So when it comes to services data harmonization, it's really been kind of educational for me because I hadn't spent a lot of time there before the last 5 years. Many of my clients spend more in services than they do on indirect materials, and then sometimes by orders of magnitude. And that warrants it being carefully managed. So when we talk about the advantages of why you would standardize and manage a service master data domain, it comes down to really maximizing your spend from a lot of respects. That and driving on-contract spend from the people who are demanding those services. Different categorization examples that we see, freight services, employee, equipment rentals, contracted services. One of the things that's been interesting to me is some of my clients who had not done services master data domain would have services tagged to their equipment as opposed to the service as what it is. So they'd actually be contracting for the same service from two different service providers based on whether or not it was an owned or a leased piece of equipment, even if the equipment was identical. So obviously a lot of opportunity lost there by not being able to consolidate that service spend. So there's just one of the little nuances that we've picked up on that where categorization, again, on what it is really important in terms of being able to get that visibility. Within the MDM realm on materials, one of the things that a lot of our clients are trying to do as part of their ERP upgrades or consolidations is to deduplicate their database. So especially when there's consolidating multiple silos of different business units, there's often a lot of redundancy in the materials. We frequently see 8 to 15% of duplicate items under these kinds of projects. I do have one client that had 75% of their annual turn was 40% duplicate. That's a big number. We don't see that very often, but the opportunity there was huge. And that's just in this one value bucket of deduplication. So we're going to have some poll questions as we go through this presentation. And if you could humor us and take a moment to respond, we'll move right back along with the presentation. Okay, we'll move on now at this point. Thank you for your participation. In terms of one of the things that we see a lot in ERP implementations, and I'm asked this all the time, is if I'm going to roll out ERP over a 3-year, 5-year journey, do I want to cleanse my data all up front under a big bang, or am I looking to do it on an sequential phased basis? And it really depends on a number of factors. We can support both, and we've done both. And I'll give you an example. One of my clients was on a 5-year journey to implement SAP across a very large organization, and they decided that they could leverage a lot of the information in terms of deduplication, spend rationalization, spend on contract if they did the big bang. So we cleansed, I think in that case it was 1.3 million materials, and we housed it in our governance tool while they went along their journey to make sure that their data stayed clean. And then at the end of, I guess it turned out to be 7 years, they switched over and loaded it into their own governance tool. So that was a case where a big bang, and they tell us that they got so much value out of that visibility into their unified enterprise view of their materials that it helped fund the ERP program. Now, I've had other clients who are region-by-region rollout, and they don't have the appetite or maybe the funding structure to do the big bang up front, and they want to do it on a sequential basis. And so we support that as well. I have one client that went through actually 5 phases on a global rollout where we did phase by each, but we did establish up front in that first phase what the data standards were going to be. So that's an important point. If you're going to do a phased rollout, you don't want to be surprising some of the sequential phases on what the data standards are, because they may push back. So it's important to upfront get that buy-in that this is what the standard's going to be. And everybody knows that upfront, even if they're not till phase 4, so that they're not surprised and don't push back. So those are 2 of the different approaches that we've seen. We can support either. It's more economical to do the big bang because there's a lot of fixed costs in doing these projects, and that doesn't vary if it's a sequential project. So if you can get it all in up front, then it'll save you some cash. But if your model is you want to do phase, that's fine too. It's not that big an uplift. So some of the pitfalls of not doing master data as part of your ERP is, when we see it all the time, is people are disappointed in that they don't have the clean, consistent reports that they thought they were going to have at the enterprise level across this brand new single instance of ERP. And that's largely due to the fact that they've imported toxic data. And because the data is toxic, people can't find things. And people can't find things, they introduce duplicate materials. And also, they don't have guidelines on how to specify new materials. So sourcing is now impacted by the fact that they're ambiguous requisitions. It also drives off-contract spend because I can't find the parts that may exist because the data is not good. So there's a number of different value areas that not cleansing your data as part of an ERP consolidation or upgrade will definitely come back to bite you. One of the biggest reasons we see around any MDM failures, and we only have one, by the way, out of 200 engagements, is really comes down to customer commitment. This is not a one and done. This is not a destination. You know, the old saying, this is a journey. And if you don't have executive air cover and resources, boots on the ground that are going to make this happen on a daily basis, the project will not be successful. I don't care how good the technology we may have it. You got to have that commitment to that resource, both from a data cleansing perspective and an ongoing data governance perspective. And we help with that in that we do as much as we can to automate the process and reduce my client's resources in terms of cleansing the data. And by way of example, it'll take us about 3 weeks to capture all the data dictionaries that you're going to need across all your commodities, and that'll take about 4 days of your time. And that's across 900 to 1,000 categories. So that's the kind of things that we bring to reduce your resources to make these projects more successful. Plus, we do have, after having done this 200 times, we have a very production-proven approach and engagement model that has consistently been successful. So let's talk a little bit about some of the questions in the Material and Services Master Data Management. Common benefit, this is motherhood and apple pie. Improved productivity, of course. If I could find things and I'm not spending my time looking for stuff or requesting a duplicate material, that's going to be a big productivity gain. There's all kinds of goodness that comes out of having a cleansed data master, from the on-contract spend to reducing inventory to having supply chain analysts not sitting there and trying to massage data all day, but being able to use actionable data to make strategic decisions. And we've seen some of our clients go from 80% data cleansing on a quarterly basis, that 20% analysis work, to putting that over. The 80% analytics work, the 20% data work. And that's produced tremendous value to the organization. Often asked, how long does this take? And this is an area I think that, we at Dantas drive a lot of value. Recently did a project with a client, 80,000 SKUs, delivered it in 14 weeks. Did a project last year with a client, approximately 950,000 SKUs, started it in March, delivered it in November. So one of the things that's important about that is you got to strike while the iron's hot on these data projects. Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen clients try to staff them themselves, and of course you've got other jobs. You don't have dedicated resources to go scrub data. And what happens is the project drags out, and if you have an ERP launch coming up, then you run right into it and you load the bad data. Either that, or the project drags on to the point where you get an executive management change, and they say, why have you spent a year cleansing 200,000 materials when we've got 500,000? Are you telling me you're doing this for another year and a half? And you will then cut the project off. So it's really about striking while the iron's hot, delivering a quality product in a short period of time. And I can't tell you how valuable I've seen that in my clients. Another poll question, please bear with us.
I don't want more questions.
Okay, thank you for your participation. We'll move on with more questions about MDM projects. As expected, most of you on the first poll are interested in deduplication, and on the second poll are interested in SAP, just as a majority. So we really see a lot of the data cleansing and MDM projects come out of three primary drivers. One of them is just the organic process improvement efforts that a lot of people will do. They don't have the visibility. They're spending too much time crunching data. They're trying to reduce duplication that they know they have, either through acquisition or whatnot. They're trying to take that next level of visibility into their strategic sourcing past just the classification level. They actually want to get down to attribution. So process improvement is a primary driver for many projects that we see. Another one is mergers and acquisition activities, where a client will buy another sizable entity, and it's one of those situations where the CFO walks down the hall to the CPO and says, I just promised the shareholders $500 million in value, and you get half of it. And the CPO says, I got 18 different legacy ERP systems through these acquisitions and our own organic systems. I have no visibility into my material supply chain base. What am I going to do? So that's where we step in, and we can help give them that unified view, be able to best consolidate their sources of supply, reduce duplication, drive more spend on contract, and help realize that value. And the other one, we talked a little bit about it already, is the ERP consolidation or upgrade. That's a logical place to step in. I mean, just from a numbers perspective, my average customer, when they do an ERP consolidation or upgrade, they're budgeting 10% of their total budget towards data migration. And of that, 4% typically goes towards materials alone, because it is arguably the most complex data domain. So if you haven't done that, and you're sitting there at the end of the day looking at 6 months till I go live, and I've got 500,000 parts, that's called a rock and a hard place. You're going to end up importing the toxic data. So those are the three primary drivers that go with that. And if our clients are trying to get a consolidated view, say in a process improvement opportunity where they want to cleanse their data across multiple different legacy systems, they'll often go with our governance tool to keep that data clean as they go forward as a bolt-on top of those ERPs. I apologize, but we have another poll question. So the results of this poll are the poorly synchronized departments is one of the big challenges that you have within your ERP system. I don't think that's a surprise. So this is a common question. Why do I need governance if I have ERP? And the fact of the matter is, we started to touch on it earlier. ERP systems are really not where you want to master your data. They're not designed for it. A free-form text field and a lack of robust classification and attribution support isn't really a good place for you to be mastering your data. So they're really, really good at what they do, which is to manage transactional data. But by managing your master data, that's static, what it is. I mean, I think of material master data management and services master data management as being the static data against the ERP, which is the transactional data. And they really have different requirements, and that's why they should talk together, but they are different applications. So within MDM, it becomes that repository of the master that can then feed any new material creation to the ERP so that it always stays in sync with standardized descriptions. But the ERP really doesn't resolve the ongoing data quality issues around keeping things adhering to your data definitions. So that's really the difference. I mean, I do have some smaller clients that have a single instance of ERP that have taken the approach of just throwing bodies at it, and that works. You can do that, but they have to manually catalog and scrub every description that comes through on a new material request and manually dedupe it before they do that. So if you've got the resources, you can make it work, but there are more elegant ways of doing it. So we're going to talk a little bit about data governance at this point. So this comes down to the ERP versus a dedicated data governance tool. Again, there's two distinct stages in an MDM project. It's the get it clean and then the keep it clean. We're going to talk about the keep it clean piece. Really what this is about is automating the process of managing that data repository on a go-forward basis. So what's that mean? It means that I'll give you an SAP example. If I'm in SAP, I can't search the long description. What if I needed some of that attribution to determine that was the part I needed? Then I would have been caught short and requested a duplicate part. If I use a data governance tool that provides easy search, find, and compare against the breadth of data describing that material, then I will find it, thereby promoting potentially on-contract spend, an efficiency of time, maybe leveraging the material out of stock. So there's very different requirements there, and the ongoing maintenance of that quality is important as well. So robust workflow to make sure that on a commodity level that those data descriptions are adhered to maintain at least the critical attributes that define that material, and to automate that process as greatly as possible is going to drive big value in the organization. One of my clients went from an average of 5 days for a new material request to 3 hours. And that's because the automation, the accelerations that come through an automated workflow process. And that workflow, again, can be modified down to the commodity level. So you're requisitioning a hazardous material, you're probably going to want somebody from environmental health and safety to take a look at that. Whereas if I'm requisitioning a motor, EHS doesn't need to be involved. So we would configure different workflows for you based on your organizational requirements based at the commodity level. So about for Dantas, I think I mentioned up front we're specific to materials, both direct and indirect, as well as service master domains. So what does that mean? That means, MRO, ingredients, product masters, spare parts. We have clients who have done well beyond this. IT assets, commissary goods. At the end of the day, if you can tell us what it is, we can process it, standardize it, classify it, attribute it for you. One of my clients, a very large oil and gas company, when they do a new site, they're essentially building a small city of 5,000 to 10,000 people, depending on the opportunity. And they use us to classify and attribute everything that goes into that small city. So it's, asphalt, the facilities, maintenance materials, to commissary goods, the wellhead engineered componentry, the downhole componentry, the commercial off-the-shelf MRO, asphalt for roads. So if you can tell us what it is, we can process it, classify it, and if required, put it into our governance tool for ongoing data management. With regards to Dantas, one of the things that I really enjoy about working here is that we've developed both our Get It Clean or Harmonized platform, as well as our Keep It Clean, our Integrity platform, to be configurable from the ground up. So what does that mean? That means we're very agnostic when it comes to different kinds of commodity code systems or taxonomies and class structures we can work with. Out of the box, we work with UNSPSC, PIDEX, E-Class, EOTD, hybrids thereof. In fact, most of my clients use hybrids thereof. We can cross-reference multiples. I have one client in the oil and gas who wants UNSPSC for supply chain operations, and they want PIDEX for their field maintenance crew. So we cross-reference both codes to each individual material. So I also have clients who said, hey, we've spent 10 years developing our own structure. We're just having trouble getting our data cleansed to it. We're like, fine. We can programmatically set up our tool in a couple of days to work with your code or your structure and process your data against it. So we are completely agnostic when it comes to things like class structures and codes. And that's also true with ERP systems. I mean, the way we integrate with ERP systems is through a piece of middleware. As long as that ERP system has the ability to talk to middleware, we have no problem synchronizing with them. So that's where we've worked with all the big boys and some of the ugly old green screens and everybody in between in terms of developing those synchronizations so that you have internet real-time synchronization on anything that either is from integrity to the ERP or from the ERP to integrity. Okay. Yeah, we get asked this question a lot when we're talking to ERP people. Like, what's this whole AI thing? And, really, we adopted AI from the beginning just to make our tool learn as it goes. So having run 100 million materials through it, it knows a lot about existing typical off-the-shelf materials. So why do you care? You care because that means I don't have to teach it that again, and it's ready to perform out of the box on most of your common materials. If you want to get technical, it's not a semantic engine, so that means it looks at the data in any order, similar to how humans would. In that we use some technologies that and algorithms that allow us to rip apart the descriptions similar to how a human would in terms of their perception of it. We use things like word probability and proximity matching. We combine that with imperative and or fuzzy logic match, and we do that all against the specific specification template. So what that means to you is we have a high-speed, accurate way of deconstructing and reconstructing your data into a very standardized format. And we have 4 kernels of technology, a high-speed classification engine, and by high-speed I mean hundreds of thousands of parts an hour. That tells us what the thing is. Once we know what the thing is, we can use our attribute extraction technology called AutoSpec, which AutoSpec is tailored to each individual specification template, and will then deconstruct the legacy description against that specification template. But once we've done that, we have a high-speed normalization engine that allows us to go through and normalize things like unit of measure across tens or even hundreds of thousands of parts in 3 or 4 milliseconds. We recognize that many of our clients have sparse or incomplete legacy descriptions, so we've developed a tool called AutoCrawl that, with a valid manufacturer or supplier name and number, can go out and interrogate websites to source missing information from those legacy descriptions and allow us to enrich them. It also works against searchable documents, and again, our tools are based on AI, and if you're interested in a comprehensive product demo, we've got a link at the bottom there that you'll be able to register with. Alternately, you can go to our website. So a little bit about Dantas. AI aside, one of the things that I think we pride ourselves on here is customer delivery and satisfaction. My having AI tools, helps us in the background, but at the end of the day, I need to be able to meet customer expectations and utilization. But what I can tell you is we've delivered over 100 million materials at an average accuracy rate of 98%. That's pretty darn good. We have a scalable technology that allows us to cover, a client with 80,000 item masters right up to 3 and 4 million item masters. In fact, we were on the project Parton back when Cargill did that with SAP many years ago, and that was about 10 million materials. So for a small company with our technology and expertise, we're really able to scale up and address some of the most challenging material and service master data requirements in the industry. Yeah, I think we've proven that, and we've earned our stripes. And we don't rest our laurels on it by any means, and we're in consistent approval. So, what do I mean by that? Improvement. In terms of improvement, our integrity tool, the governance tool, has been on the market about 8 years now. We're in our 19th major revision. It's an industrial strength tool. I have a client that has it out to over 7,000 end users in a hosted environment, no issues. So that's what I mean by continuous improvement. And I'll get off my soapbox at this point, but I wanted to thank you and say if there's any questions, you can send them in over chat and be happy to answer them for you. Okay, yeah, I just got one around Maximo. Multiple instances of Maximo and data standardization. Well, I will say Maximo, in terms of the asset management softwares out there, has one of the more robust classification capabilities. Again, you got to build it and maintain it, but it does do a better job than most in terms of that. Now, I have several Maximo clients where we cleanse the data for them, and a couple where they use our integrity tool because they have disparate ERP systems they're trying to manage and govern their data across. But in terms of Maximo's standalone single instance, once we've cleansed your data, we give you the class structure, the separately fielded attributes, as well as the descriptions that you can load into Maximo. And if you have the appropriate governance resources, you should be able to manage it there. If you don't, of course, then a governance tool could be in play. But I would say that, that's one of the things that you should consider. If you have multiple instances, then that's a bigger challenge. Yeah, that's kind of what I've seen. Okay, there's another one here. How do we compare to SAP MDG? Well, SAP MDG is a multi-domain MDM solution, right? They go well beyond what we do. They do more than just materials and service masters. They get into customer, supplier, et cetera, et cetera. However, they're more of a toolkit. You're going to be building a lot of stuff in that. Whereas we're largely pre-configured for what we do, and we're domain specific. So what we do very well, but we only do it within our domain. What they do very well, but it's a big, big bang to get there. And by big, big bang, you can see multi-year MDG rollouts across multiple data domains. By contrast, I'm doing a project right now at oil and gas down out of Dallas, and we're processing their data. They opted to go with our governance tool. We have been deploying it in parallel. As the data is deployed, as the data is ready, we will be going into user acceptance testing on the governance tool within 3 weeks of data delivery. So we're not talking a multi-year, multi-million-dollar project. We're talking, 6 figures, not 7, and we're talking, months, not years. But I think that's the difference between us. And whatever strategy you want to take, that's great. I have several clients who have MDG, but they used us for the data cleansing because they wanted to reduce their risk in that area. And that's fine. We provided them with the class structure, the attribution, the separately fielded attributes, the short and long descriptions, and they loaded that up into MDG, and they're up and running. So we are not tied to selling software to our services. Again, our model started with providing services, and we're true to that to this day. We only have the software because of a client demand. For those clients who didn't want to go through the multi-year, multi-million-dollar implementation, but saw a lot of value in keeping their data cleansed in the materials and services space, right now today. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Yep, here comes in one. What is the resource requirement to cleanse, in this case, it's approximately 100,000 materials? So the way our engagement model works, say for 100,000 materials, is for cleansing. This is the get a clean piece. We would take that data upon contract, and my deployment team would profile that for 2 weeks. We would then come on site for a 3-day workshop, maybe 4 days. 100,000 parts might only be 3 days. And we would need select SMEs with commodity expertise to review the data findings that we have and give us any guidance on how they want us to configure the data templates. So that would be, say, worst case, say 4 or 5 man days, because we would only meet with one commodity person at a time, so they would be freed up, unless it was a general category person. But it all works out to the same manpower commitment or person power commitment that would be about 5 days. And then there's 2 primary quality checks as we come back. The first one is we come back with the corrected, configured data templates to confirm with you that they are accurate. And that's typically done via WebEx. The kickoff is done on site. You confirm that those are good, then we start processing the data. Now, the only touch points at that point will be a weekly meeting with your project manager for an hour, with my project manager, and any questions that have come up in the data that we've seen, if there's something we don't recognize, for instance, and that we need clarity on, that would incur additional resource, but that's going to be hit or miss, and that's going to be, less than 10% of somebody's time for the duration of the project. And then the next major touch point is in the quality review on the delivery of the data. And we typically do a 10% data review, and that usually takes less than 2 days. And so that'd be about another 4 man days of power for our 100,000 parts. And at that point in time, we're ready to deliver. There's a day or two of IT time in there to do the initial data extract and then the data load at the end. So all told, you're looking at under 20 man days. I hope that was sufficient an answer. Okay, I got one more question that just came in, and it says, how do you determine duplication? That's a great question. We determine duplication in 3 primary ways. When we take the data, we standardize and normalize not only just the technical parameters, but we also do that with the part numbers, the manufacturer numbers, the supplier numbers, the manufacturer names, and the supplier names. And when we do that, we do 3 different matches. The first match is an exact match. That's where we find different internal part numbers with the exact same description. The second way we do it is with a manufacturer name part number match. And that's where, after having normalized the data, standardizing the data, that often produces significant results. The third area is once we've gone through the data scrubbing piece and we separately fielded the attributes, it gives us an opportunity to go through a fit, form, and function suspected duplicate analysis. So if it has the same parameters or attributes, it may likely be functionally equivalent. And so that's another suspected duplicate report. And we actually have a fourth one that we run often, and that's just based strictly on manufacturer and supplier number. And once we find we've normalized those, oftentimes those come to us misfielded, right? We find manufacturer number in the vendor field and vendor number in the manufacturer field and vice versa. So when we go through the normalization process, we'll run through a hit just based on the pure part number and see what we get. Because oftentimes, as you're probably aware, your suppliers will use the manufacturer's part number as one. So we want to get that match against just the number and take the supplier or manufacturer name out of the equation, because we can often scrape out some duplicates that way as well. So those are the 4 ways in which we will identify duplicates. Okay, the next one's around the industries we call on. We call on 7 primary industries. We do the most in natural resources, utilities, oil and gas, food and beverage. Then the others are, less than 10% of what we do. So those are, anybody who has large asset-intensive manufacturing is really a target for us. If you've got a lot of moving parts, spare parts, even direct parts. I've got clients that we've done just strictly direct materials, and those are obviously a beefier project because the attribution requirements are higher. And let me take a second on that. So our average client for an MRO part will use between 4 to 6 attributes to support search, find, and compare, right? And that's the right number because they don't want to over-attribute the part, because then they got to maintain that data, and they're putting the onus on the creator to add that data, but it's not adding any value. So it's that inflection point between how much do I need and, that to get the job done. And that doesn't mean a motor won't have 12 attributes and a lubricant will have 2, but it just means on average we see 4 to 6. In the direct world, when you're having engineers put things into products that are going to ship to a customer, the attribution requirements become much more stringent. And I have a client that, no kidding, we developed data dictionaries for them around precision military castings for weapon systems, and they had 59 attributes on average. But that was some pretty heavy lifting. But in order of magnitude, direct materials typically do have a significant higher number of attributes. Okay, another question about Ariba. So Ariba, we cleanse data for Ariba. Ariba tends to downplay the notion of a consolidated catalog because they want you to use their punch-out supply chain network or supply network. So that's totally customer preference as to how they want to manage that data. And I can see how that makes sense for things like office supplies and things like that. But for things like MRO, most of my clients want a consolidated enterprise granular view. And that doesn't mean you can't source it through Ariba if you want to, but most of them have that in their item master. And they're using that traditional item master approach to procurement through their own requisitioning system. So, Ariba certainly has a fit for what I would consider those types of attributes, types of commodities. But when it comes down to, a transverse takeoff 4-degree tier reducer, I don't think you're going to be sourcing that through Ariba. It's really a balancing act between what you want to see. So one of my clients, they've decided that they want a unified view of their buy-side catalog across all their on-contract materials. So they're using our technology to do that. And they're standing up, in this case, 40,000 suppliers. I know that's a big number. They're a big company. So that they have a unified view so that they can compare and contrast across suppliers. In Ariba, you can't do that. And it may not matter. If you're buying all your office supplies from Staples, you got your Staples catalog set up on Ariba, you don't need to compare and contrast because you know that's where you're going. But in the MRO world, that's not necessarily true. And in the direct materials world, that's not necessarily true. So it's really about looking at the use cases, the business drivers in the organization, and figuring out which commodities need to live where. And if it's a stocked item in inventory that's on your item master, I'm assuming it's not going through Ariba. And I was assuming if it's a technical component that's non-stock, it's still likely not going through Ariba. So that's what I've seen anyway. I hope that was helpful. I see we're getting up on the top of the hour, and I want to appreciate and thank all of you for listening to me. If you have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to reach out. Our team is very responsive, and we'll be happy to help you out with whatever we can provide in terms of background information that may help you on your journey. We have a number of white papers. We're happy to do demos that talk about what other people have done. I have the luxury of a deployment team who have deployed, like I said, over 200 engagements. And so we've got some real-world experience in terms of what it takes to get there. And we'd be happy to share some of that with you should you so choose to want to engage us on that. So, again, I'm George Pasty. I want to thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. I hope we hear from you soon. Thank you.